My name is Claire Holloway, I'm 33 years old, and until 3 years ago I believed the hardest thing a woman could survive was watching her husband fall in love with someone else. I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't losing him. It was watching him choose my best friend, then disappear as if the last 8 years of our lives meant absolutely nothing. I rebuilt everything from scratch in Savannah, Georgia. New apartment. New job as a senior event planner. New routines. New friends. The only thing I never rebuilt was my trust. Then, 3 years later, they both came back. Not because they missed me. Not because they were sorry. They came smiling, like they had already won. The second Ethan stepped into my parents' backyard barbecue, he looked straight at me with that same arrogant grin I used to mistake for confidence. Beside him stood my former best friend, Vanessa, holding his arm like it had always belonged there. Ethan laughed softly before saying, "Regret losing me yet?" He actually said the letters out loud. Everyone around us went quiet, waiting to see if I'd fall apart. I didn't. Because what nobody at that barbecue knew was that 6 months earlier I'd discovered something about Ethan that even Vanessa didn't know. I had kept that secret locked away, waiting for the day he walked back into my life thinking he still held all the power. As I looked at him smiling across the yard, I realized that day had finally arrived. But before I tell you why neither of them was smiling by the end of that weekend, you need to understand how my marriage ended. Because the affair wasn't even the most painful betrayal. The real betrayal came from someone I never expected to lose. My parents didn't know the whole truth at first. Neither did most of our friends. From the outside, Ethan and I looked like the kind of couple people secretly envied. We had been married for 4 years, owned a small townhouse outside Savannah, spent our weekends exploring coastal cafes, and talked about starting a family someday. Looking back now, I realize we spent more time talking about the future than actually living in the present. Ethan was always chasing something bigger, better, more impressive. Nothing was ever enough for him. Vanessa had been my best friend since college. She knew every embarrassing story about me, stood beside me as my maid of honor, and cried during our wedding vows. At least I thought those tears meant something. Everything changed on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. One of my corporate events ended earlier than expected, so I decided to surprise Ethan with his favorite barbecue from a place downtown. I remember smiling the entire drive home, thinking he'd love the surprise. When I opened the front door, I immediately heard laughter coming from upstairs. Not just laughter. Her laughter. For one impossible second, I convinced myself Vanessa had simply stopped by to visit. She had a spare key. She was practically family. Then I heard Ethan say, "She'll never figure it out." I froze halfway up the stairs. The silence that followed felt louder than any scream. I didn't storm into the bedroom. I didn't throw things. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I quietly pulled out my phone and started recording. Every laugh. Every word. Every excuse they hadn't even realized they were making. Years of planning luxury weddings had taught me one lesson. When everything falls apart, documentation beats emotion. I walked back downstairs before they even knew I was home and sat in my car for nearly an hour. Staring at the steering wheel while trying to understand how two people I trusted most had managed to destroy my entire life in one afternoon. But discovering the affair wasn't what shattered me forever. What happened after I confronted them was the moment I realized I hadn't just lost a husband and a best friend. I had also lost almost everyone I thought would stand beside me, and my parents' reaction hurt more than the affair itself. When I finally showed them the recordings, my mother covered her mouth and cried. For one hopeful moment, I thought she was crying for me. She wasn't. She was crying because, in her words, this family has already been through enough. Enough? My husband had cheated on me with the woman I'd called my sister for almost 15 years. But somehow, I was the one expected to keep the peace. My father leaned back in his chair and sighed. Claire, he said quietly, people make mistakes. Don't throw your whole future away because of one mistake. That's what he called months of lies. Vanessa didn't even try to deny it. She folded her arms, looked directly into my eyes, and shrugged. You were growing apart anyway. Ethan nodded beside her like they had rehearsed that line together. We didn't plan this, he added. Funny how people always say that after they've been caught. Nobody plans betrayal. They just keep making choices until betrayal becomes impossible to hide. The divorce took almost 9 months. I kept the townhouse because I'd invested more into it before we married, but Ethan fought over almost everything else. Every piece of furniture suddenly became priceless to him. By the time the papers were signed, I felt emotionally bankrupt. 3 months later, I saw the photos online. Beach ceremony. Sunset. White roses. Vanessa wearing a dress that looked suspiciously similar to the one she'd once helped me choose for my own wedding. Thousands of people congratulated them. Comments filled with heart emojis. Perfect couple. So happy for you both. Nobody talked about how their happiness had been built on someone else's heartbreak. I stopped checking after that. Not because it didn't hurt. Because I realized pain grows wherever you keep feeding it. So I disappeared. I threw myself into work, accepted larger corporate events across Georgia and Florida, and slowly built a reputation that clients trusted. For the first time in years, my life belonged entirely to me. Then something unexpected happened. About 6 months before that family barbecue, I received a phone call from a woman named Linda Mercer, a forensic accountant working with a federal investigation. At first, I thought she'd dialed the wrong number. She hadn't. She asked if I had ever been married to Ethan Brooks. When I said yes, there was a long pause. Then she asked something that made my stomach twist. Mrs. Holloway. While you were married, did your husband ever ask you to sign financial documents without reading them? I remembered every single one. Business papers. Investment forms. Tax amendments. He always handled the money. I trusted him. Linda didn't accuse him of anything over the phone. She simply asked if I'd be willing to meet. 2 days later, I walked into her office carrying a folder of old tax returns, bank statements, and documents I'd almost thrown away after the divorce. By the end of that meeting, I understood why Ethan had walked back into my parents' backyard smiling. He thought I was still the woman who knew nothing. What he didn't know was that I had already spent 6 months helping investigators put together the puzzle that could destroy everything he had rebuilt. I walked back into my parents' backyard carrying nothing but a glass of iced tea and 6 months of silence. Ethan was still smiling. Vanessa looked so confident she barely glanced my way. My father tried changing the subject. My mother kept asking if anyone wanted more potato salad. It was obvious they could feel the tension hanging over the table, but nobody wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. Then Ethan leaned back in his chair and laughed. So, seriously, Claire. He looked directly at me. Regret losing me yet? A few awkward chuckles escaped around the table. Nobody knew what to say. I slowly placed my drink on the table. No. That single word caught him off guard. He smirked. Come on. You're still alone while Vanessa and I have built an amazing life. Vanessa squeezed his hand like she'd just won some invisible competition. For years, I would have cried. Not anymore. I looked at Ethan calmly. Tell me something. He shrugged. Sure. How's Brooks Capital Consulting doing? The smile disappeared. Not completely. Just enough for me to notice. What? I asked how the company is doing. Vanessa frowned. What company? Interesting. She didn't know. Ethan answered too quickly. It's just a consulting business. I nodded. That's strange. I reached into my purse and placed a thin envelope on the picnic table. I thought federal investigators called it something else. Nobody moved. Ethan stared at the envelope without touching it. My father finally spoke. What investigators? I looked around the table before answering. About 6 months ago, I was contacted because someone believed Ethan had been using shell companies to move investor money through fraudulent consulting contracts. Vanessa slowly turned toward him. Ethan. He didn't look at her. I continued. They asked me about financial documents I signed during our marriage. My mother covered her mouth. Ethan told me those papers were normal tax forms. They weren't. I slid several copies onto the table. Highlighted. Organized. Every page dated. I didn't know what I'd signed back then. But I know now. Vanessa grabbed one document and scanned the first page. Her face lost every bit of color. What is this? Ethan finally stood. This is ridiculous. No, I answered quietly. This is evidence. He reached toward the papers. I calmly placed my hand over them. Don't. They already have certified copies. His shoulders dropped for the first time since arriving. I could almost hear him calculating every possible escape. There must be some misunderstanding. The investigators said the same thing. I smiled politely. Until they found the money. Vanessa looked completely lost. You told me your business was successful. It was never a business, I said before Ethan could answer. It was an investigation waiting to happen. She stepped away from him. You lied to me? He reached for her arm. Vanessa, let me explain. She pulled away. No. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes. Claire. I didn't know any of this. For the first time in years, I believed her. Maybe she had stolen my husband. But she had also married a man who had spent his entire life lying. My father broke the silence. You need to leave. Not me. Him. Ethan looked around the yard searching for someone to defend him. Nobody did. He picked up his sunglasses and walked toward the gate without saying another word. Vanessa stood there for another minute before quietly following him. Neither of them looked back. 3 months later, federal prosecutors announced fraud charges against Ethan and several of his business partners. The investors eventually recovered part of their money because enough records had been preserved. My name was officially cleared. The investigators even thanked me for keeping documents I had almost thrown away after the divorce. That surprised me. Because I hadn't saved those papers for justice. I'd saved them because I wasn't ready to remember. Life has a strange way of turning old pain into future protection. Today, I'm still in Savannah. I still plan events. I still believe in love. Just not the kind that asks you to compete for it. If losing Ethan taught me anything, it's this: the right person never makes you wonder if you're enough. And the wrong person eventually mistakes your silence for weakness. Sometimes, the strongest revenge isn't finding someone better. It's becoming someone who no longer needs revenge at all.